Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another episode of our Malicious Compliance series, where people follow instructions to the letter just to spite others. In this episode, I've got some great stories, 9 to be exact, and they're all pretty satisfying. Story 1, pour your drink, no problem. Showcases a casino worker cleverly handling a rude customer's demand for table service. Story 2, can't wait to start waiting, follows a medical worker outsmarting an impatient patient with persistent phone antics. I hope you stay for the stories today and subscribe for future videos. This first story is titled, Pour Your Drink? No problem. I worked in a gambling establishment that offered table service. The job was horrendous. Customers treated you like absolute garbage, and the management did nothing to back you up, so the customers did it even more. This incident happened within my first month. A gentleman ordered a J2O and a glass for the gaming table. I delivered his drink and glass to him and placed them on his little table on wheels. I notified him that I'd placed his drink at his side. He looked at me, looked at his drink, looked back at me, and shooed me away with his hand. I was furious, but I was getting used to customers being moody, especially if they were losing money. About 20 minutes later, one of the managers approached me. Apparently, the gentleman had complained to my manager, saying I needed lessons on how to empty a bottle of J2O into a glass. He thought it was ridiculous for me to assume he would pour his own J2O. The casino offered table service, so he darn well expected table service. My manager told me that when customers tell me to jump, I basically need to ask how high. The manager also said he didn't want to hear another complaint about me from this guy. Later in the evening, the gentleman asked me for another J2O. So, off I went and delivered his J2O, but of course, I couldn't forget to pour his drink. He knew I'd been told off, so he was staring at me intently as I brought his drink over. I gave him a big, beaming smile and said, "Here's your drink, sir. Can't forget to pour it for you." As the words escaped my mouth, he had a smug grin, like he thought he'd won, and responded, "Good girl." I lifted his J2O up quite dramatically high into the air and tilted it into the glass, with it splashing onto my tray because of the height. The glass was quickly getting full, but he wanted his J2O bottle empty, and I made sure I emptied the bottle at a dramatic height. While his glass began overflowing, his face turned from smug to, "What in the world are you doing?" He quickly complained to the manager, who was spineless. The manager asked me what the heck I was playing at, and I responded, he wanted his J2O bottle poured into his glass, so I did just that. Another manager laughed and said, "Manager, if he told Judy that's what he wanted, that's what Judy gave him." Strangely enough, he never asked me to pour his J2O again. Oh, what a beautiful story! I can only imagine that guy's face when the drink was splashing everywhere as she poured it. This next story is titled, Can't Wait to Start Waiting. This is my first time posting here, but my workplace tends to produce a lot of situations that fit the nature of this series. This particular instance occurred a few months ago. I work in a high-volume private practice medical setting with a job title that has me doing a mix of clinical and administrative work. This particular night, the front desk was short-staffed, and I was asked to help cover until the phones turned off at 5 p.m. We were getting a barrage of phone calls, which meant I was answering the phone mostly by picking it up, instructing the person to hold for the next available staff member, placing them on hold, and then picking calls back up in the order they were received. Simple, right? Until a patient, who's always abrasive and rude, Mr. Patient, called. I said, "Thank you for calling Place of Specialty. This is Earl Grey Tea speaking. How may I help you?" Mr. Patient responded, "My insurance has changed to out-of-state Medicaid. Does Dr. Person accept that?" I replied, "As far as I'm aware, we can't accept Medicaid plans from other states. You do have the option to pay out of pocket for visits. Let me transfer you to billing, and they can take a look, okay?" I put him on hold and popped back to the billing coordinator, who was one room over, and explained the situation. I asked her to pick up his line. She said she was finishing up with another client but could get to him in a minute. Before she could pick him up, he hung up. Okay, whatever. I went back up front, and the phones were still ringing like crazy. I went to answer the next call and saw that it was Mr. Patient again. All 3 of my lines were ringing, so I just did what I was supposed to do. I answered, told him to hold, and put him back on hold so I could work through everybody in order. He was at the top of the line, so no big deal. I could pick him back up in about 15 seconds. Except he hung up again and then called back again. I saw what he was trying to do, and I was immediately annoyed. He wanted instantaneous attention, and in the process he was prolonging my ability to help him and tying up my lines. Refusing to give in, I picked up, greeted him, and immediately put him on hold. I started helping my other callers, and he hung up and called back again. I continued to work down my line of calls and assist them, pausing in between to answer his calls and put him back on hold. We repeated this cycle no less than 7 times until, finally, I picked up the phone and he shrieked, "Do not put me back on hold!" Defeated, I relented. At this point, I could have assisted him several times over had he not been so ridiculous, and now I just wanted him gone. I said, "How can I help you?" He said, "I just changed insurance, and I need to find out if you accept it." I said, "Absolutely, we can check for you. Would you like to speak to the billing coordinator?" He responded, "Yes, I want you to go get her." I said, "Sure thing, I'll go get her for you. One moment, okay?" And with that, gleefully, I reached down and put him on hold. This next story is titled, "You Won't Check to See If My Fax Came Through? Fine, enjoy the next 500 copies of my fax." This happened about 5 minutes ago at my local DMV. I've been here for the past hour and 48 minutes and finally saw someone who had bumped me back into the queue while my insurance company sent proof of insurance. I had an email sent about 15 minutes ago, but apparently that wasn't enough. Anyway, there was this gentleman standing, reading out numbers, even though they were announcing them over the loudspeaker. While I was on the phone with my insurance company, I approached the gentleman to ensure they received the fax so I wouldn't have to call again. Instead of double-checking or even politely declining, he decided to make a bit of a scene. "No," he exclaimed, "we only take faxes of your insurance as a courtesy, and you need to sit back down and wait for your turn in line." I was a little taken aback. However, I wanted to make sure everything was okay, so I asked the guy, in the event that the fax doesn't go through, what happens? Well, this was apparently the wrong question to him, as he lashed out, screaming, "That isn't our problem! If it doesn't come through, you'll have to come back a different day because we're closing. I suggest you have them send it multiple times." I was a bit dumbfounded, so I walked away, telling my insurance agent, "Wow, that's probably the biggest jerk I've ever spoken to in my life." The agent chuckled, and I told him the guy asked for the fax to be sent a few times and asked if he could accommodate that. My agent, looking to make good on customer satisfaction, said, "He never did specify how many times, right?" Well, it turns out my insurance company has an auto-fax system, so they could send as many copies of my insurance as they wanted. What if someone mistyped and wrote 500 instead of 50? That would be a real shame, wouldn't it, filling their fax line while 500 faxes came through? It was something so petty that only a child would do. Well, unfortunately, I'm a child, and the DMV is currently receiving 500 copies of my insurance. I hope they get at least one of them. 500 faxes! How long does that take to get through? I don't even know how long it takes for one fax to get through. Stories like this get me excited. Just be nice. You won't get 500 copies of your fax if you just answer the questions. This story is titled, "No Backpack? Say Hello to My Satchel." In middle school, after Columbine, our school went a little overboard with safety measures. All of a sudden, one day, they said no backpacks were allowed. Everyone was a little upset, but things took a turn when some of the girls started exchanging their small purses for massive, "I can put 4 textbooks in here" purses. At first it was 1 or 2, but it quickly spread. After the first week, almost every girl, about 500 of them, had a massive purse. So that weekend, I went out, bought a Satchel Man purse, and brought it to school. Note that I'm a male. I got to my first class and was immediately pulled aside and told, "No backpacks." I politely told them that it was a purse, and that if the girls could carry one, so could I. So, I got dragged down to the principal's office. They called my mom, who laughed at them, and told them she supported me 100% and that I could speak for myself on the matter. She also told them not to bother her at work for silly things. They tried a ton of arguments to say that I couldn't wear a purse because I was a boy. I asked them to have the district lawyer write that on school letterhead, and we could go from there. At the thought of having a lawyer involved, they dropped it, and I was able to wear it the rest of the day. On Tuesday, all purses were banned. On Wednesday, there was a line of about 50 irate parents freaking out at the administration that they had the nerve to ban purses. How would their precious daughters carry their books, and heaven forbid those who had hit puberty? By Thursday, backpacks and purses were allowed again. This story is titled, "My Aunt Told Me to Warm Up Her Cheesecake, So I Did." This happened when my aunt still lived with me. I had just finished making a cheesecake for my mom's birthday. It was a raspberry cheesecake, my mom's favorite. After we finished dinner, I brought out the cheesecake, and we all yelled, "Happy birthday!" I cut the cake and gave everyone a piece. Not even 10 seconds after putting down the plate, my aunt said, "It's too cold. Heat it up." I just looked at her and said, "You're not supposed to heat up cheesecake." She scoffed and said, "Shut up and just heat it up." I was already annoyed with her that day because she kept making fun of my tattoos. So I said, "Fine, I'll heat it up." When I went into the kitchen, she yelled, "Make sure it's hot." I just smiled to myself and said, "Don't worry, I'll make sure it is." I then put the piece of cheesecake in a small bowl and put it into the microwave for 7 minutes. When it was done, I took it out of the microwave, and it was a bubbling, boiling hot bowl of cheesecake soup. I grabbed a spoon, brought it out, and placed it on the table in front of my aunt. When my aunt saw the bowl, she just stared at it. But when my mom saw it, she started laughing uncontrollably. My aunt looked at me quietly and said, "What is this?" I just smiled and said, "You said you wanted it hot, so there you go." I sat down and ate my piece of cheesecake as my aunt stared at her bowl. My aunt never told me to heat up her food again. "Your aunt is a monster! What kind of monster heats up cheesecake?" This story is titled, "Security Made Me Show the Last 5 Photos on My Phone." Is security even allowed to do that anywhere? My coworker, an absolute hero, maliciously complied at a security checkpoint on one of our subcontractor jobs. The customer was a manufacturer of high-end electronic components. Security was tight, as a small 4x6-inch box could contain $250,000 worth of microchips. Our team was installing equipment in the facility for a week. A security checkpoint had to be passed every trip in or out of the building. The security guard, let's call him Chad, decided that my coworker Steve seemed more suspicious than the 4 other technicians. So, every trip in or out, not only was Steve made to dump the entire contents of his backpack onto the table for inspection, but Chad also required Steve to show him the last 5 pictures taken on his phone to prove he wasn't stealing secrets. This was fine, except Chad let everyone else through without any inspection. Steve tried to stay positive, but this was clearly eating away at him. Steve started being overly positive and a bit snarky with comments like, "Thank you, Paul Blart, for keeping America safe," which cracked up the rest of the crew. Then Steve had an idea that would free him for the rest of the week. Wednesday came along and Steve was overly scrutinized as usual. As we headed to security at lunch, Steve said he had to go to the bathroom. He came back out a few minutes later, absolutely giddy. Chad, the mall cop wannabe, stopped us on our way out and asked Steve to see the photos on his phone. Steve gladly handed the phone over. Chad was greeted by some very peculiar angled shots of Steve's backside and immediately threw the phone down on the table. Steve said, "Oh, sorry, I thought I had a medical issue and wanted to see how bad it was. Is everything okay with my pictures? Is the facility safe?" Chad never checked Steve's materials again. Good on you, Steve. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how good old Steve pretended to steal the company's secrets. What a master plan. Poor Chad is probably scarred for life. This story is titled, "Science Teacher Has a Swear Jar." I took a biology class during my sophomore year in high school, and my teacher was pretty cool. She was laid back, funny, and didn't have your typical teacher vibe. She had set up a curse jar in the room and the funds were used to pay for supplies. It cost 25 cents if you swore, but $1 if you dropped the big F word. I can see where this is going. One day we were doing group work at tables with Bunsen burners and sinks in the middle. Behind me was a kid who was particularly annoying and talkative. Patrick was probably the type of kid who went on to cure cancer or create Minecraft. He was a smart kid, but basically a 17-year-old Martin from The Simpsons. Anyway, we were all trying to work, and Patrick was getting on my nerves. He kept making loud, bad jokes and poking his head into our project, telling us what we were doing wrong. I asked him twice to just worry about his own table, but the third time, I lost it. I walked up to the front of the class, pulled out my wallet, grabbed $1, and put it on the teacher's desk. I turned around and quite loudly said, "Patrick, shut the heck up!" I knew something like that was going to happen. I walked back to my table and sat down. The entire class was silent, staring at me. Then the teacher looked down at the dollar bill on her desk and started laughing out loud. The rest of the class joined in, and Patrick shrunk into his seat. The teacher then said, "Well, he paid his $1, and that's the story of how I told a kid to shut up in class without getting into trouble. That's also a great life lesson. With enough money, you can get away with anything. Also, why did the F word cost so much more to drop than the other ones?" Next story, I did it my way. Many moons ago, after I married a self-absorbed jerk, he started revealing his bad behavior in subtle, stupid ways. One way was that he stopped doing his chores and stopped cleaning up after himself altogether. That was really insulting because I always worked a full-time job, and before we got married I'd been very clear that I was not going to be a housewife and that we would do things equally. Well, His answer to that was to say that I couldn't make him do anything. If I wanted the house clean, I'd have to do it myself. Doesn't he sound like a champion? This made me think of the Simpsons episode with Blinky, the three-eyed fish, where Homer says to Marge that she can express herself with her lovely home. So I replied the way Marge did and said, "Okay, I will," and immediately set to work, starting with the living room. I gathered my ex's jackets and clothing he left strewn about and tossed them on his computer chair. His backpack and books dropped on the chair. Then I went to the kitchen, took his dirty dishes and boom, onto the chair. His dirty laundry, plop, onto the chair which had fallen over by now, and so on until the house was clean. Yay! Now my ex couldn't use his PC until he cleaned up his stuff. That first night he took it like a man. The next night, when I dumped all of his stuff on his chair and, for good measure, vacuumed the rug and dumped the canister all over his stuff, he squealed like a pig and said, "What are you doing?" I answered, "I'm cleaning." He wanted me to do all the cleaning, and this was how I was going to do it. He started doing his chores after that. The divorce came later. This next one is titled, "Gonna Try to Return an Item with No Tag or SKU. Watch Me Destroy It in Front of You." I work at a chain retail discount home goods store where the main demographic is older women. We have a very clear and somewhat strict return policy due to the number of people who have abused returns in the past, such as stealing and returning to launder money. It's simple. And printed at the bottom of every receipt, unused merchandise can be returned with the original receipt and packaging within 30 days. Simple as that. Today, I had an older woman, probably in her late 60s or early 70s, come in with a return. I gave my usual "anything wrong with it or did it not work out for you?" as she handed over the bag with the receipt. She said, "No, it's a headband, but when I unwrapped it, I realized it's not the style I wanted." "Oh, right," I said as I took the headband out of the bag. "No packaging, no tag, no SKU, just a piece of gray fabric." I said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't take this as a return since there isn't any packaging or SKU number." "What? But I have the receipt! That's all I need for a return," she said, already getting snappy and angry with me. When customers act like this, it just makes me want to help them less. Nevertheless, I kept my customer service smile and voice on and said, "Ma'am, at the bottom of your receipt here, you can see where the return policy is stated." I calmly pointed out the policy to her. She said, "Well, the receipt should be all I need. I want my money back." At this point, I was done arguing with her. I asked if she wanted to speak to my manager regarding the policy, and of course, she said yes. I went to the office to get my manager, who's in her mid-60s and was on an important conference call with the other managers of the district. I explained what was happening, and she said, "Oh, we'll get this straightened out," with a smirk on her face. I followed my manager out of the office and back to the register, where the woman was still pouting. My manager doesn't put up with any nonsense and, trust me, is probably more experienced than any other employee at dealing with irate customers. But she knows that since I'm only 20, a lot of these older women refuse to take what I say seriously and will only hear it from someone much older. My manager opened the bag, looked at the woman with a straight face and said, "So, no packaging, not even a tag?" "No," the woman replied, this time a little less aggressively. "Accepting this return would be breaking company policy," my manager said bluntly, "but it isn't worth losing a customer over $2.99, so we'll do it this one time. Please keep your tags in the future." Cue the malicious compliance. My manager turned to me as I input the return into the point-of-sale system and said firmly, so the customer could hear, "Damage it out and throw it away. Make sure you destroy it too." So, I did as I was told. I grabbed the scissors from my register's pencil cup and began hacking away at the headband, slicing it up as messily as I could, right over the counter in front of the customer. "What are you doing?" she yelled at me. "We are very serious about following company policy here, ma'am, and since you don't have the original packaging or tags, we can't resell this," I said as I chucked the shredded bits of fabric into the trash can. She yelled, "I could have used that as a rag." At this point, I knew for a fact that my manager was sitting in the office, quietly listening and snickering to herself. I finished up the return and gave the woman her $2.99 back with a friendly, "Have a nice evening," as she walked out the door. The woman in line behind her came up to the register, and as I was scanning her items, she said, "You don't realize how stupid and entitled the general public is until you work retail." I couldn't agree more. Some people are just too shady. If she's returning the item, why does she feel so bad that it's getting shredded? Unless she felt bad about wasted materials, which I'm pretty sure she didn't. She probably expected to keep the returned item and get a refund since it had no tags or packaging, and that was only over $3. As a reader dropping a comment on these stories, I'm absolutely loving the mix of petty revenge, malicious compliance, and straight-up karma. These tales are packed with satisfying moments where rude customers and entitled jerks get exactly what they deserve. Here's my take on each, written like I'm chiming in on a forum. Pour your drink? No problem. Oh, this is glorious. The smug guy demanding his J2O be poured like he's royalty got what he asked for. Literally. OP's dramatic high pour, splashing juice everywhere, is the kind of petty I live for. That good girl comment made my skin crawl, but the overflowing glass and his shocked face? Priceless. The second manager laughing and backing up is the cherry on top. Love when the team has your back. The commenter's right, bet his expression was epic when the drink went everywhere. Gotta ask. Anyone else pulled a "you asked for it" move on a rude customer like this? Can't wait to start waiting. Mr. Patient's tantrum over being put on hold is peak entitlement. OP sticking to their hold routine despite his incessant hang-ups and callbacks is hilarious. 7 rounds of it? Dedication. Putting him on hold again after he demanded to speak to billing was the ultimate power move. The fact that he could have been helped faster if he'd just chilled is so ironic. The commenter's excitement for these workplace stories is spot on. This kind of petty feels so good in a chaotic environment. Got any other tales of making impatient callers sweat? You won't check to see if my fax came through? Fine, enjoy the next 500 copies of my fax. This DMV story is petty revenge perfection. The rude worker dismissing OP's legit concern about the fax and telling them to send it multiple times? Big mistake. Flooding the fax machine with 500 copies is such a savage move. Bet that office was drowning in paper. The insurance agent playing along with the mistyped number excuse is pure gold. The commenter's shock at how long 500 faxes would take had me laughing. Seriously, how backed up was that machine? Anyone else hit back at a rude bureaucrat with this kind of chaos? No backpack? Say hello to my satchel. This one's a masterclass in sticking it to the system. The school banning backpacks post-Columbine only for girls to exploit the purse loophole is hilarious. But OP, a guy, rocking a man purse to make a point? Legendary. Getting dragged to the principal's office and shutting them down with the lawyer threat was bold, and "Moms don't bother me at work" attitude is iconic. The parents' revolt forcing the school to backtrack is the best part. Talk about a win for the kids. The commenter's right, OP's satchel move was a total power play. Any other school rule loophole stories out there? My aunt told me to warm up her cheesecake, so I did. Okay, this is peak malicious compliance. Aunt demanding hot cheesecake and mocking OP's tattoos deserved that bubbling bowl of cheesecake soup. 7 minutes in the microwave? That's commitment to the bit. Mom laughing uncontrollably is the wholesome twist I didn't see coming. The aunt's stunned silence as she stared at her hot dessert is everything. The commenter calling her a monster for wanting warm cheesecake is so true. What kind of person ruins a perfectly good dessert like that? Got any other family members who got served with over-the-top compliance? Security made me show the last 5 photos on my phone. Is security even allowed to do that anywhere? Steve is my hero. Chad the security guard singling him out for excessive checks and demanding phone photos is such a power trip. Steve hitting back with awkward backside pics is the ultimate "you asked for it" revenge. Bet Chad's still traumatized. The snarky Paul Blart comments had me dying, and the fact that Chad stopped checking after that? Victory. The commenter's right, poor Chad's probably scarred for life. Gotta wonder if that phone photo rule was even legal. Anyone else dealt with an overzealous security guard like this? Science teacher has a swear jar. This is such a fun one. The laid-back teacher with a swear jar is already awesome, but OP dropping $1 to yell "shut the heck up" at annoying Patrick? Iconic. The whole class laughing and the teachers he paid his dollar approval is perfect. Patrick shrinking into his seat must have been so satisfying. The commenter's quip about money letting you get away with anything is hilarious, and yeah, why is the F word $1? Got any other stories of using classroom rules to your advantage like this? I did it my way. OP channeling Marge Simpson to deal with a lazy ex is pure genius. Dumping all his junk on his precious computer chair, clothes, dishes, even vacuum dust, is such a satisfying way to make a point. His squealing reaction and finally doing chores shows it worked. The commenter's Blinky the three-eyed fish reference is spot on. Love the Simpsons vibe. It's sad the marriage didn't work out, but OP cleaning their way was a total win. Anyone else had to get creative to make a lazy partner step up? Gonna try to return an item with no tag or SKU? Watch me destroy it in front of you? This one's so cathartic. The entitled lady thinking she could return a tagless headband and snapping it up for following policy is classic. The managers destroy it order and OP hacking it up with scissors right in her face? Savage. Her yelling about using it as a rag screams scam attempt. Bet she wanted to keep it and get her $2.99. The customer behind her calling out the public's entitlement is so real. Retail workers deserve medals. The commenter's shady lady theory is spot on. Got any other retail stories where you got to stick it to a scammer? That's it for this episode. If you all enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up and let me know what you think in the comments. If you aren't subscribed, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because I upload videos almost all the time, because I have no life and all I do is read Reddit.